Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Export Development Canada's webinar about trade and exporting to Mexico. I'm Phil Taylor, and I am the moderator for today's session, and I'm also EDC's corporate spokesperson. Now, a little administrative duties before we begin. Please note that we're also webcasting today's session using simultaneous French translation. So, if you would prefer to listen en français, simply click on the français button on your screen. Alors, pour notre auditoire francophone, nous offrons une traduction simultanée disponible sur votre écran. Veuillez tout simplement choisir le bouton français. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with Export Development Canada, or EDC, think of us as a bank and an insurance company all rolled up into one. And we are completely dedicated to helping Canadian companies like yours grow your business in every international market out there. So we help companies like yours, all sizes, across all sectors, to respond to international business opportunities. Now, part of that help comes from sharing our market knowledge and expertise, which we've gained the hard way by working with more than 7,000 companies like yours in about 175 markets worldwide. The purpose of today's webinar, then, is to share some insight from our experts on how to successfully tackle business in Mexico. So here with us today are two expert guests. The first, joining us on the phone from sunny and warm Mexico, we won't hold that against him, is François Rivest, Minister Counsellor from the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service. Welcome, François.
Good morning, everyone.
Now we also have EDC's very own Chief Representative from Mexico, Teri Nizzola, who is also located in Mexico but is unfortunately here in very cold Canada. Welcome, Teri.
Thank you. Hi.
Now, so what we'd like to do is also to welcome all of you, and we're glad to have you on board. The agenda today, so that you know how it's going to go, is we're going to provide you with an overview of the Mexican market and the various sector opportunities for Canadian companies. And then we're going to move to tips from our guests on how to overcome some of the obstacles or challenges faced when you start exporting to this market. We're also then going to close up with how EDC and the Trade Commissioner Service can help you and your company begin selling into Mexico. Sort of think of it as your first step. But the fun part is going to be the last 20 minutes or so, where we'll be taking your questions live. Anything that you have on your mind about exporting to Mexico, let us have it. We want to hear anything that is on your mind. We want to bring value to you. So let's get started. Teri, let's go with you first up. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at EDC and how you help Canadian companies.
Great. Well, Phil, I've been at EDC for almost 18 years now. And I started actually at EDC as a financing underwriter, involved in financing transactions across the world, but doing a lot in Mexico specifically. I've been focused and covering Mexico for the past 3 years, and I made the big move into the market in September 2013, so I've been in market covering Mexico. The EDC is very active supporting Canadian investors and Canadian exporters in Mexico. In fact, over the past 5 years, we've supported over close to actually over $20 billion of Canadian investment and exporting into Canada. We see that number growing. The trend has been growing. As well, we have supported Canadian exporters from our head office for decades. So we've been involved in the Mexican market. Some of our relationships date back to the 1970s. But we've had a physical presence in Mexico for 15 years. So this year we're celebrating our 15-year anniversary. So that's great news. Our EDC team is located both in Mexico City, in the Canadian Embassy. We're co-locate in the Canadian Embassy together with some other provincial partners. And we also have one representative in Monterrey in the Canadian consulate there that focuses on specific sectors in the Monterrey region. So what are we doing? What our objectives here are to continue, or in Mexico City, are to continue strengthening relationships, building relationships with the ultimate benefit of offering financing solutions to benefit long-term Canadian exporters. So how do we do that? We do that through a whole gamut of different solutions. On the financing side, we can do it by offering lines of credit, bilateral facilities between EDC and the foreign Mexican company, as well as getting involved in structured and project finance transactions. As well, we can be part of a club deal, which is a smaller group of banks lending, and participate in syndications.
And for those at home, when we talk about syndications, club deals, facilities, it's really a group of banks that are getting together to provide support, financing support for a foreign company, in this case Mexican companies. And we can
Correct.
participate in all of those, right?
Correct.
Right.
And that group, what we also call them, we call them pull facilities. And what that means is we leverage the relationship to pull Canadian companies into their supply chain. And that's where we work very closely with the Trade Commissioner Services and our other partners in market to make those introductions and to put the Canadian company in front of procurement decision makers at some of these large companies.
What are some of the companies that we do have a relationship with that you're talking about this introduction? I'm sure that's of great interest to our readers.
That's actually a great question. So as I mentioned, we've had long-standing relationships with a lot of companies. Good examples are Pemex, which is the national oil company from Mexico, dealing with them since the 1970s. CFE, which is Comisión Federal de Electricidad, which is the monopoly power generation and utility company in Mexico, as well America Movil, which is the large telecom operator, both on the fixed and the mobile.
We just announced a transaction with them last
We
year.
did actually.
Late last
we
year.
did. So
That's
see,
right.
our relationship continues, and that's actually an interesting relationship because we started with a very small facility, and with a few Canadian companies selling to them. And over the years, that relationship has evolved. We offer greater financing to support a greater number of Canadian exporters. So we're really happy with that. Some of the other facilities I should mention, because it's across board, many different sectors, is Minera Frisco, which is a mining company, one of the largest mining groups in Mexico as well. We have a financing relationship with them, as well as Grupo Alfa, which is a very large, important group in the Monterrey, with a headquartered in Monterrey, that is involved in a multitude of sectors, ranging from automotive, which we know is which I'll talk more about, as well as oil and gas, petrochemical, and food, offering again Canadian companies the opportunity to sell to a multitude of different sectors with one group, as well as Navistar, which many of you know is the builds trucks, and Grupo Poresa, which is another group in Monterrey that is involved in the automotive, food, and some other segments.
Okay.
So we have quite a bit of and there's more. So I'll stop.
I was about
here.
to say, it would
I'll
probably be quicker to list all the ones we don't have a relationship with than the ones we do with. Thank you, Teri. So let's, obviously a lot of different things that EDC can do to help a Canadian company, but one of the things we want to do today is let's talk about the opportunities. What are you seeing out there? What are some of the trends? What are some of the major moves that you're seeing in the market right now?
So what I'm seeing is actually a significant increase in interest from not only Canadian companies in the market, but also foreign companies. So the current government embarked on a very aggressive reform campaign. So they have introduced numerous reforms since they came into power in December of 2013. And those reforms cover the education system, financial system, fiscal, labor, the list goes on and on. For some of the sectors, they've reformed the telecommunications sector, as well as the energy sector, which is being referred to as the mother of all reforms, because the impact of the reforms in the energy sector are significant, very, very significant. So the reform, I'll just say a little bit more about the energy reform, if that's okay. The energy reform is basically ending the monopoly that CFE and Pemex, again, the utility company, power generation, and the oil and gas company, have had in the market for over 75 years, and allowing foreign investors to come into the market and compete in the marketplace. So that is obviously opening up opportunities, not only to continue selling to Pemex and CFE, but also to these new entrants that are going to be entering in the coming into the market. One important point is that Pemex accounts for 35% of the government's revenues. So there is, and also as a result, they didn't actually reinvest in a lot of their operations because the government depended on those revenues. And now that it's becoming a productive entity of the state under these new reforms, we are going to see Pemex taking on a more aggressive investment. However, I should say with the reduction in oil prices, you know, it's interesting. There is a reduction, so they've already made an announcement that it'll be less, but we're still talking about billions of dollars of investment. So instead of 30, between 28 and 30, you know, they're talking now between perhaps 25, you know, 20 and 25. So there's
did you
billion.
say only for 25 billion?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So there's still significant investment to be done as well. Another phenomena we're seeing actually is reshoring. So as we're seeing also in the southern part of the United States, there's quite a significant amount of reshoring and companies coming to Mexico. The population in Mexico is huge. There's, you know, over 125 million people, which I sometimes feel are all in Mexico City because of the chaos in there. And also they have a very young and educated population. So they actually have what they need to meet the capacity that is required in the global economy, which actually is going to be more of a challenge for some other countries. For example, Canada, where we have an aging population, you know, and we may not have what we need to meet this incremental capacity that is required. So the reforms have also are going to have a positive impact on companies coming into Mexico with reduced energy costs, because that's the expectation, is that the energy costs will go down. Reduced
For the companies.
for the companies,
Yeah,
yes,
okay,
sorry,
right.
just to be clear on that, and as a result, reduced manufacturing costs, and also we hear that their labor costs are up to 20% lower than in China, which was where a lot of the companies were setting up. So we're seeing a major announcements on a regular basis of foreign companies who are setting up operations in Mexico.
I should also point out as well, you know, we often think about the impact of the higher U.S. dollar impacting and driving down the Canadian dollar. That's also happening in Mexico. So if there are opportunities to expand into Mexico, this actually may be a very good time, just from a cost perspective, in terms of the currency, because it's almost in lockstep. The difference still existing, but you don't lose as much by investing in Mexico as if you were going to invest in the U.S., simply as a result of both the peso and the Canadian dollar dropping down. So an interesting aspect
Correct.
for that major trend.
Yes.
So let's go into sectors. Let's try to break it down a little bit for our audience. Where are the sectors that you see growing, and what are the opportunities for Canadian companies?
Okay, great. So some of the sectors that we see of great opportunities in Mexico align very well with Canada. So the oil and gas, you know, the mining sector, the automotive sector, all strengths within Canada. So we see that very, you know, at the top, I would say. And then we see opportunities across a whole slew of other sectors. For example, telecommunications, as I mentioned, that they're opening up with the energy reforms, aerospace, which is another sector, and the infrastructure. So, but I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Okay.
So on the energy side, you know, when we talk about the energy reforms, which everybody's talking about in Mexico and everybody's wanting to learn more about, a lot of people always think about the oil and gas side of the energy, but there's another part of that, which is the power generation, transmission, distribution. But on the power generation side, there are significant opportunities there because the government of Mexico is looking at diversifying their generation, and their objective is to have 35% of their energy from renewable type energy. So again, we know that there's a lot of Canadian companies that have good skills there that would open up opportunities for them in that specific part of the energy sector. And then the oil and gas, it's a given. Canadian companies were strong there, so there's going to be lots of opportunities for them as well. On the automotive side, I mean, Mexico is now listed as the 8th largest producer of vehicles in the world. So, you know, that's quite significant. And almost all of the global OEMs almost, I think, except for a couple, have operations in Mexico. And if they're not there, they're probably
They're
going to be
coming,
there
yeah.
really soon.
Yeah.
And some of them have more than one plant. So you see that phenomenon of them setting up in Mexico to take advantage of the reforms that are happening and the labor force. We see that happening. The cluster effect is happening as well. There's a lot of companies, suppliers to the automotive sector that are establishing themselves around the OEM. So that's another, again, we see opportunities for Canadian companies to be a part of that cluster effect in the automotive sector. Infrastructure. We talked a little bit about infrastructure. So the government, when they came to power, had indicated that they had a budget of or they plan to spend $600 billion in new infrastructure. So that's a lot of money, a lot of money. While we expect it to potentially decrease, given the impact of the lower oil prices and the reduction in revenues from Pemex, we still know it's going to be a big number. I mean, we're still talking very big investments.
What are they spending it on?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So there's rail projects, there's ports, there's roads and toll roads, because there's a lot of infrastructure required for the expansion, as well energy, water treatment, water systems to improve all of that. As well, they made an announcement that they're building a brand new airport. So just as an example, that project alone is $13 billion for this airport. And we're already in discussions with the airport authority to see how, again, we can get Canadian companies introduced at an early on stage as they're preparing for some of the procurement decisions that need to be made before the construction actually begins. So that's a very important, and we're doing that together with the Trade Commissioner Services. And then aerospace. So while aerospace, I wouldn't say it's booming. The sector's booming, but the supply is building. But the government is making it a major priority for them, and they expect to be one of the top 10 producers in the aerospace sector by 2020. So they're making a lot of investment into that sector. And again, around the cluster effect. And as you know, Bombardier is there, and there's a cluster actually forming around Bombardier Aerospace that's currently in Querétaro, which is a great area for companies to look at setting up, given the cluster impact.
Yeah.
Telecom, maybe I'll just talk briefly, because there's
ahead.
a lot I could say, but I think I'll stop here with the last one on telecom.
This is what they want to hear. Keep going here.
So on the telecom sector, we've had players there that have been in the market for a very long time, almost like monopoly operators. But now that it's opened up, we're already starting to see the new entrants coming into the market. AT&T announced a major investment, acquisition of 2 other operators, and also the industry has been, I would say, lagging in investment. So they are going to be looking for new Canadian technologies. Canadian technology companies are, world-renowned for having great ICT solutions, different types of applications. So we expect, again, opportunities for companies within that sector in Mexico to open up as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, fairly fulsome. Thank
Yes,
you.
There's more. There's
I know there's more. We'll get to it in the questions. So you heard Teri talk a lot about one of our key partners, which is the Trade Commissioner Service. François is going to give you a great layout, but I have to say, if you're thinking about exporting into any market, that's the first call you make. Tremendous support that they provide to Canadian companies, and they do it for free. And their knowledge is very deep. So with that, we're going to go to François and just give you a little rundown of how TCS works with Canadian companies. François, I'm going to hand it over to you. Let's talk about the TCS and your role there.
Thank you, Phil. Good afternoon again to everybody. So the Trade Commissioner Service, many of you are already familiar with what we do, but in a nutshell, we're part of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, and we have people around the world to help Canadian companies doing business in foreign markets. So in the embassy here in Mexico, we've got a team of people. We also have a team at our consulate in Guadalajara and at our consulate general in Monterrey. And we work closely, as Teri mentioned, with EDC as well as with other partners, local and Canadian and so on, to help Canadian companies wanting to do business in Mexico. So, for example, some of the services we provide, we have a website which you can look up, which lists all our services and how to contact us. But some of the services we provide include providing introductions to key qualified contacts in the market, providing market information and market intelligence, explaining what the opportunities are in specific sectors, what the risks, challenges, and threats are, what the competition is doing, whether it's Mexican competition or foreign competition, who are making the purchasing decisions in companies, what the potential clients' plans and purchasing intentions are in the future. We also help with troubleshooting. So if you come to Mexico, for example, you've had several meetings, great visit, you go back to Canada, but you're not hearing from some of the people that you talk to who seem very excited about your product or service. We can help follow up with these people. Another example is if you've shipped a product or provided services and you haven't heard back again from the client, or there's an issue of some sort, we can help by following up. If you're running into difficulty with a shipment stuck at the border or at the airport, we can help there as well. If you're having trouble obtaining permits, trouble with a tax refund, we can provide advice and, depending on the situation, possibly make a few phone calls on your behalf. And we can also provide information on potential partners locally, service providers, law firms, and so on, and where to obtain more information about rules and regulations. That's about it.
That's all, really? That's about it? That sounds like an awful lot, François. So we heard Teri talk, François, a little bit about some of the key sectors in Mexico. From your perspective, what's your insight, or do you have any comment to add based on your experience in the market?
Sure. Teri did a good job covering a lot of it already, but I'll just say that Mexico is a key trading partner for Canada. It's a member of NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And it's also a member of the Pacific Alliance, which consists of 4 countries, Mexico, Chile, Colombia, and Peru. And Canada is an observer of the Pacific Alliance. Mexico is our 3rd largest trade partner. We imported $25 billion from Mexico last year and exported $10 billion. This is only merchandise trade, so it does not include investment, services, and so on. Canada is the 3rd largest investor in Mexico. We have $17 billion worth of cumulative investment in the country. Mexico also has 12 free trade agreements, which gives it access to 44 countries. Mexico has a lot going for it. As Teri said, they have a young workforce. The average age is 27 years old. Cost of labor, again, very competitive now compared to China, as Teri mentioned. Large population, and like Canada, it's close to the U.S., and it has ports on both the Pacific and the Atlantic. But they're closer to the southern parts of the U.S., which is a good complement to Canada's access to the northern U.S. It's also an excellent gateway to Latin America, and it's projected to be the 5th largest economy in the world by 2050, according to certain economists. But most of all, it's right next door. All you have to do is hop over to the U.S. to come over, and they share a lot of the time zones that we have. In terms of the priority sectors, we have priority sectors at the embassy. Automotive, Teri talked about automotive. You will have seen stories recently, including in the Globe and Mail yesterday, I believe, or the day before, about Mexico becoming a global player. It's true. Last year, Mexico produced 3 million cars, and they're forecasting to produce 4 million by 2019. This year they've exceeded, or last year they've exceeded Canada in terms of car productions. Our Canadian auto parts manufacturers are following the OEMs that are establishing in Mexico. We have about 50 Canadian car plants here now, including many from Magna, Linamar, Martin Ray, ABC Group, and so on. Aerospace, Teri touched on this as well. I'd just like to add that over the past 5 years, Mexico was the largest recipient of investment in this sector of any other country in the world. It started with Bombardier, but in places like Querétaro, there are a cluster of companies in that sector, including companies like Aerocopter and Safran. Not to be neglected, agriculture. Mexico is a very strong and competitive producer of agricultural products, especially fruits and vegetables. but that doesn't mean that there aren't any opportunities for Canada. We export a wide range of agri-food products to Mexico, including meats, grains, and oilseeds. Bimbo, which is the largest bread maker in the world. Some of you may have heard about them. Last year, they bought Canada Bread for $1.8 billion. And they also buy 400,000 tons of Canadian wheat annually. There's opportunity for a lot more in this sector. The Mexican middle class is 40 million people, and they are increasingly conscious about consuming quality food products. And they are also looking for alternate sources of feed for their livestock and fish. Teri talked about energy. I think I can skip over that. Clean tech, she talked about this as well. Mining. So mining, we have 200 Canadian mines in Mexico that are Canadian-owned. Things are a bit more difficult now because of the drop in commodity prices and a new tax of 7.5% that was imposed on the mining sector last year. So this is harming our mining industry in Mexico a little bit, but in the long term, Mexico continues to be an important mining country. Teri talked about infrastructure. I'll skip over that. And services. As Mexico presents a great opportunity for services as well. Education, financial services. Scotiabank is here. They have 800 branches. Tourism and food services are all subsectors of interest to Canada.
So you mentioned some of the services, and far too often we tend to think of exporting or trade as shipping a box from Canada to another market, but the services is really individuals and the knowledge or the intellectual property that they have that they are exporting as well. And I know we've seen some opportunities in the life sciences or healthcare sector, particularly when it comes to healthcare equipment and also e-health, I believe we're looking at as well in the Mexican market. You touched on clean tech very quickly. We tend to think of that as a singular industry. In fact, clean tech touches every single sector, from capturing gas emissions and recirculating it and not losing those emissions and finding another way to make that profitable, to water management, to smart grids on both on the power side and also the telecommunications side. And that is something that Canada is a world leader at. We don't trumpet it enough, I don't think, but some of the companies that we have advancing clean technology are doing so at leaps and bounds. So something to keep in mind for all of our audience out there today. So just before we go to the fun part, which is the questions and answers, and we'll get to that in a moment, I just want to take a few moments. François, any last sort of minute tips or advice that you would want to share with a company, and maybe some common questions that they would ask you that you hear a lot, just so that maybe we can get our how we can get our Canadian companies thinking about how do we do business in Mexico and why is it easy to do so?
Okay, thanks, Phil. So as I said before, Mexico is almost right next door, and it's a very pleasant climate, as you alluded to in the beginning.
Thank you for rubbing that in. We really appreciate that.
Okay. We share a lot of things. In many ways, it's easier to do business in Mexico than it is in other places where we tend to go, like China and India. Mexico shares similar values. It's a democracy like Canada, and they have respect for human rights and the environment, for example. I've been in China before, and arguably they don't necessarily have the same values there as they have in Mexico. That's not to say that there are not problems in doing business here. There are corruption issues that we hear about a lot in the papers, violence and crime in many parts of the countries, but not everywhere. There are parts of Mexico that are considered very safe, so you have to be aware of those things, and we can provide advice on this. And in terms of how to do business in Mexico, a lot of it is very similar to the kind of advice we give to doing business, to exporting or doing business anywhere. You need to research your market, you need to visit frequently, and work on developing a network of contacts. developing relationships in Mexico is extremely important. Use partners, so the Trade Commissioner Service, EDC, chambers of commerce, and so on. Hire local representatives, and to the extent that you can, know and speak the local language and culture.
Thanks, François. Teri, same question for you. What are we looking at in terms of tips and advice on how to start doing business in Mexico? What are some of the common questions that you hear, or some of the recurring themes about Canadian companies when they're first starting to be interested in the Mexican market?
So I guess I can say that they have tons of questions, and one of the recurring themes is, how should I set up business, or how should I establish myself? And that's one tip I would like to give is, do your homework, understand the different ways you can set up a business, and then you have the information you need to say, okay, I'm either going to go in with a joint venture, I'm going to use agents or distributors, or set up an affiliate or a branch, whatever you decide to do. So those are all, doing your homework and understanding the impact and the tax implications of all of this is very important. Also, visit the market. As François mentioned, relationships are important. So that's how you establish the relationships. Visit the market, get to know people, build relationships, talk to companies who have been in the market, companies who have been successful, and those that have had challenges. So you really understand the full gamut. As well, I would say a little word of a caution, just to be more patient, because things in Mexico do take a little bit longer than what we're used to in Canada. And if you don't have the language skills, that actually it slows down the process a little bit as well. So back to François' comment, knowing the language is also definitely a positive.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with that, we're going to go to the question session. So at any time, if you would like to ask a question, please just hit the question button at any time, and we'll just take them in the order that they come. Anything goes. If you want to know about how to do business, if you want a specific deeper dive in, say, a given sector, or if you want to know about specific companies, let's just do that, and we'll get right to that. So. Start with the questions. We already have one, and I want to be able to jump right in there. The question we had was, does this webinar actually cover the how-to? Yes. So let's get specifically to your questions. The how-to, I'd like to export jam to Mexico. So how do we start with that? So if you've never exported before, let's just assume that you haven't and you're thinking about Mexico. The very first thing you're going to do, very first call you will make will be the Trade Commissioner Service. Free service, and what they'll do is they will help you understand the market and perhaps understand your unique sales proposition in that market. You have to know what your competitors are in that market. The second call you're going to make is in Canada with, say, the Canadian-Mexican business. What is the Canadian-Mexican Chamber of Commerce?
Yes.
Canadian-Mexican Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
It's the second call you're going to make. And what they're going to do is very specifically be able to identify what is specific to your sector, and they will help you set a plan in place and also help you to introduce you to the right people in the Mexican market that can help you advance your knowledge of the market. So you start with the Trade Commissioner Service, and then you move into the Chamber. The third call you're going to make is in Mexico, the Canadian-Mexican Chamber of Commerce. They always have both ends, right? So you're going to call the Mexican end, and then that will help you extend into the knowledge base in the market and help you make connections. People like lawyers, say, for example, a Deloitte & Touche that can help you maybe put together a fulsome market study. That's the very first three calls you're going to make. By the time you get through with those three and your homework in that regard, you're going to have a very good idea of whether or not your product is right for that market. If that, in fact, is the case, the next two calls you're really going to be thinking about are, again, that Deloitte & Touche to do a deeper dive and then help you with your launch strategy. And then you're going to need lawyers and perhaps an agent, as I think Teri mentioned. So that's really your first step, and that's the how-to. Jam specifically, I don't know that we can get into that unless you have some views, but the food sector is fairly active in Mexico.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, the only one thing I want to add, that and then if you're concerned about the risk of non-payment or not being paid when you sell your jams, that's when EDC can help you with what we call accounts receivable insurance, whereby EDC provides insurance. So if you don't get paid, EDC can actually insure you up to 90% of that, and then we go and recover the amounts directly with the Mexican buyer.
Teri also mentioned that if you need to set up a joint venture, financing that type of venture with your Canadian bank can be challenging. It's not that they don't want to do it, it's not that they don't do it, it's just that it's outside their comfort zone. We mentioned that, I think François mentioned that Scotiabank is there, but it is outside of the norm. Now we can work with them and help them do it, or we can do it on our own. So if you're looking for financing to set up a joint venture and you think that might be a difficult thing, that's what we do every single day. So that's an opportunity as well. Anything to add with that, François?
Just to say that we do have some team members here that are specialized in the agriculture and agri-food sector. So they have a lot of contacts in that industry, including food chains and so on, department stores, and they can provide you with assistance. So please look them up on the website, or if you can't find them, just send me an email and I'll put you in contact.
Okay, thanks, François. In fact, we actually had a question regarding your comment. So the website that François is actually referencing, just type in Trade Commissioner Service, and it'll take you right to that website, and there's always a wealth of information there. So that is the one, this is a question that we had, that is the one that François is actually referencing. We also have another question. Teri, we'll start with you. A little deeper dive on the agricultural industry. We have a company here that is looking to expand, but may need some assistance. They provide services to greenhouses. And I know that's something that we've actually done a few transactions related to greenhouse development in the past. So
we have actually. So EDC has actually supported Canadian exporters who have set up some greenhouses. We do provide financing solutions together with the local banks. So in a situation like that, it's always best that the Mexican company deals with their local bank, and then we can come in and partner and provide a guarantee up to a certain amount of that financing that's being offered by their local banker.
Yeah.
So that's a good financing solution that could be used I mean, we've used greenhouses as an example, but it could be used across multiple sectors.
So if you're looking for assistance in that sector, definitely, as Teri mentioned, is foreign buyer financing. So your customer in Mexico, if they need money to be able to purchase from you, we can do that. Can help you finance your JV. François, a little deeper dive into the agricultural industry. What's your view?
Just to say that there is definitely demand for greenhouses in Mexico. So welcome to the market.
Yeah. Okay, so hopefully we provided a little bit of help on that greenhouse question. Next question. What areas are considered to be safe, and any advice for when we might be traveling into market? François, I know that you have a bit more access to that type of information. How about we start with you?
Okay, so there are places that are absolute no-goes in Mexico. It's state by state, really. So there's places you don't want to go, absolutely don't want to go, is places like Michoacan or Guerrero, parts of northern Mexico. But there's other places like Querétaro, we talked about. Southern Mexico, generally, like the Yucatan Peninsula, the state of Chiapas, are considered relatively safe. And wherever you go, there are things that you have to be careful about, and very specific things about, going to ATMs and not wearing jewelry, that kind of stuff. There's also advice we can provide on how to protect yourself if you need to go to remote areas. Our mining companies here that I mentioned deal with that on a daily basis, a security issue, and we can provide advice on that. There's a long list of things to do. And happy to entertain any questions offline. But generally speaking, each state is different. So the situation also changes over time. So do ask the question from a reliable source about your destinations before you decide to go there. If you ask a local person, they'll tell you, oh, it's safe. But for Canadian standards, absolutely not.
Okay. Anything to add, Teri?
Well, I just may add that there's that's part of the do your homework piece. So make sure you reach out to the experts, people who know. There are people who are very in tune with the the security situation. So again, part of your homework, reach out to them and ask the questions. Okay. Absolutely.
Okay. We've got a question here. I'm going to need both of you to weigh in on this. In the context of setting up a JV in Mexico, let's assume 50% Canadian ownership, 50% Mexican ownership. Are there any restrictions to bringing back profits to Canada after paying local taxes in Mexico? François, you may have a bit more view in terms of that, so we'll start there and we'll go to Teri.
I'm not sure I can speak to that very well, but one thing to flag is the difficulty in getting tax refunds in Mexico. It's a bit of a challenge for companies. In terms of repatriating profits, I haven't heard any of this any Canadian company mentioned this as an issue, but tax refunds are an issue.
Okay, so repatriating funds and bringing back money to the Canadian parent, you've not heard that being an issue?
No, and neither have I.
Okay.
So that's not a challenge, a challenging situation for Canadian exporters.
Okay, not that it means anything. I've also not heard, but that.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't live in Mexico. I wish I did, though, especially in this weather. Okay, next question that we have going here is, what about the pharma drug development and manufacturing sector? Any opportunity there? So we know a little bit in terms of health and sciences and life sciences and e-health. What about pure pharma and manufacturing in the pharma sector?
So we know of Apotex, which is a large Canadian company that has operations there and has had operations just for a very long time. We know that would be a good source of information to gather more information. More information on the cluster, to be honest, I'm not as familiar. So I don't know if François has anything more to add to that.
François?
Yeah, I don't really. Again, we do, as Teri said, we have Apotex here, and we have, from what I can tell, a lot of medical products, including prescription drugs manufactured locally. So there's obviously a potential, but I'm not aware of the issues. We can certainly look into this if you contact us.
I would add to that as well that we actually have a broader life sciences sector specialist here at EDC, and specifically for pharma drug development, whether it be transfer of IP or purchase of IP, and purchasing market rights into a foreign jurisdiction. This is something that we do in terms of financing against those assets, so whether they be IC or market rights. So if I think we will have your email on record, and I'll put you in touch with our expert in that regard, and he will be able to give you a much deeper dive, and he's very knowledgeable, so I'm sure you'll enjoy that. Two things here on this particular question. We've got two about the cluster. One question asks us, we've heard clusters a few times. They want a better definition, but the other second part of that is where is the automotive cluster in Mexico? So just by way of definition, a cluster is when a group of companies all specializing in a unique area, particularly in terms of a supply chain, where you usually have an anchor company and then you have suppliers around them. In the case of, let's just say, aerospace, you'll see a cluster in Montreal where you have Bombardier, who is an OEM, and they have, that's the anchor company, if you will, and you have a number of different companies around them, like Rivest and the landing gear maker. So there's just a number of companies around them, and it's just-in-time supply chain, so they need to be close. The same thing happens in other jurisdictions. So that's just a very basic description.
Perfect.
So,
perfect.
Yeah. So in terms of the automotive cluster, I assume it's in Monterrey, but
there is definitely a huge cluster in Monterrey. And just to talk about Querétaro, which we've mentioned before, a couple of weeks ago we were actually in the industrial park there, and it's fascinating actually the number of Canadian companies and foreign companies that are set up there again for the cluster, the automotive effect, and the OEMs that are in that area as well. We have our expert in Monterrey, back to Monterrey, Arturo, who is the lead on the automotive sector, that works very closely with OEMs, has established great relationships with a lot of the OEMs, and he's hearing more and more about the type of supply they're looking for, so that he would be a perfect person to contact for that specific sector to get more details on that.
François, anything to add in terms of the cluster concept that you're seeing in Mexico, particularly in the auto sector?
Yeah, so in Querétaro, there is an industrial park there that has over 150 foreign companies in the auto sector, but also in other sectors, manufacturing, appliances, and so on. The auto cluster in Querétaro actually stretches all the way up north to Lyon. So there's a corridor of investment in that sector. And then, as you mentioned, Monterey, the aerospace cluster tends to be in Querétaro as well. We have an ICT, or the ICT companies tend to be centered around Guadalajara and Mexico City.
Okay, thank you, François. Next question we have here. We've got a lot of them rolling in. 20 minutes left. I think so far, if it stays, I think we'll probably get through them all. But there's a lot here. Question here that actually we can maybe knock off a few of them. What does the customs process relative to the U.S. look like? So, for example, Canadians are used to the Canadian-U.S. customs process. For a Canadian company going into Mexico, how does it compare in terms of similarity to the U.S. customs process between Mexico? Can you bring any light to that, Teri?
Unfortunately, I'm not definitely far from being an expert on that.
Okay.
The thing is, there's a lot going through by rail and by trucks
Okay.
versus by ocean, by sea. But how it compares, unfortunately, I'm not an expert, and I think François' team is probably a good starting point, and I don't know if François has anything he could add to that.
François, how can you bring any light to that?
I could just say that you have to fill out the forms. So you have to fill out the forms for the U.S., but as well for Mexico to go into Mexico. But I haven't heard any complaints from Canadian companies. We are looking the three countries at simplifying. Trying to use the same kind of information and so on, make it easier. But companies have not been complaining. This includes the big ones like Bombardier and so on, which ship a lot of products across the border. The only area where we have issues is in agri-food, where inspections have to take place at the border depending on the product, whether it's wheat or something else, and that delays the shipments by several days at the border. But for other kinds of products, we haven't heard complaints from the companies.
So relatively comparative then, and mostly the trade seems to move fairly well. Would that be a fair assessment then, François?
Yes, and the brokers would have the details. Those are that are specialized in exporting to Mexico.
Okay, so if, for example, we were to reroute this question to you, then François, you could put them in touch with brokers that can help them?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Question, we talked about, Teri, and both of you, we mentioned CFE is going through a major reorganization at the top levels. Are you aware of this? The answer is yes, we
Absolutely,
know that. Yes. We would need to know and have access to C-level executives. Can you help? So the answer to that is, does EDC provide the ability to introduce at the C-level? Yes, we do that. That's part of the pull transactions that Teri was mentioning. But we should have a caveat in that when we do those warm introductions, we make sure that the match is very, very good. And that's very important to understand. The reason that we don't just introduce any Canadian company is that we'd rather have a higher rate of match, so to speak, so that we don't waste the time and expenditure of a Canadian company or the time and expenditure of our foreign customer as well. So if you have a service or a product that is very well matched to what their needs are, then yes, we would be more than happy to make that introduction. So there's a follow-on question to that question is, if yes, we know who you are, we will contact you directly and find out more. Anything you want to add?
Absolutely. If you don't mind, I'd like to add that so CFE, as we've talked, as we mentioned earlier, is definitely going through significant changes with regards to the reforms. So there's a lot of change within CFE, and to be quite frank, I'm not sure they know how it's all going to fall and how it's all going to pan out with the energy reforms. We are in contact with them on a regular basis. Unfortunately, there's more questions than answers right now. Yeah. We do have contacts with procurement people, but there are changes there as well. So there's some procurement people who are moving, taking different department, going to the Secretary of Energy, moving around. So all that to say is that's the value that EDC and the Trade Commissioner do have, is that we're in market, we're establishing contacts, maintaining old ones, and trying to establish new ones with the new players that are entering. But back to confirm Phil's comment, we definitely don't have a problem making introductions, but the match has to be there. Yeah. So CFE has provided us us with some initial thoughts on what they're looking for. Still more to come on that, given
Yep.
the energy reforms and the changes. But once we get more information, we'll have a complete, a more fulsome story of their procurement needs and be able to share that too.
Speaking of the energy reform,
Yes.
nice segue into the next question. The number of questions related to that is, okay, so we know this is coming, everyone's talking about them. When is this actually going to happen? That's the million-dollar question everybody wants to know. So, Teri?
So I have an opinion. I think, and then I'll definitely invite François to say some words as well. So the reform started. It's over a year now that it started. So as you can imagine, undertaking such a monumental change, something that they haven't seen, hasn't been happening in 75 years. These are going to take time. So they're going to take time. And now with the reduction in the oil prices, things are going to be delayed a little bit further until they get comfort level and see what's happening there. So I'm of the school where, or the thought, because some believe that it's not going to happen, but I believe it will happen. It's just going to take time. There's, it's like moving a mountain because of all the changes. And quite frankly, this is new for everybody at CFE and at Pemex.
Yeah.
So they haven't experienced this before. It's not like they have some, experience to say,
No
oh, this is how,
playbook.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. There's no playbook.
Yeah.
So how do they do it? So it's taking time. It really is taking time for all of this to happen.
François?
So yes, Mexico's announced bidding for round one earlier this year. I think it was like early January or maybe late December.
On the oil and gas.
And they have a website. Their website is called www.ronda1 RONDA1.gov for gobierno.mx, and there is all the information there about the bidding for round one, which is going to be closing in I believe it's around June. And they have announced their intention to announce further bidding processes or rounds in the coming future. This particular round one is for shallow waters north of the Yucatan Peninsula. So you can look that up on the website. They've got all their bidding conditions and so on there. Unfortunately, I'm looking it up now, it's in Spanish. I thought that they had an English summary or translation, but I can't see it. But I remember that they were quite adamant they were going to produce one. But we can help you with the interpretation. And the other rounds will include deep water, shale gas. They have said that they would possibly postpone some of those round announcements as a result of the drop in oil prices, but they're still going ahead, and the potential is huge.
Okay, thanks, François. There's a couple of questions that we have here related to how do we find a sales agent or a representative in Mexico, a number of different recommendations there. A lot of that actually, we covered it a little bit before, where you start doing your research, which would start with the TCS, would also be the Chambers of Commerce, both on the Canadian side and the Mexican side. And once you start to hear your name more than once, something that you might want to look into, but your final start is probably going to be an organization called Trace International. And what they do is they do deep background checks on these agents to make sure that you're dealing with someone who is ethical and has a very good track record in terms of dealing in an above board way in the market. And that's extremely important, particularly if you were, well, in any sector, but particularly if you're in the service industry or if you're bidding on large infrastructure contracts, you want to have a top-of-the-line agent representing you. So really it would be those sort of three steps. Anything else to add, Teri?
No,
That's pretty much it.
And I think the embassy has a list of some names that they're familiar with.
Oh.
François.
François, can you help out with the agent request?
Yeah, so it depends on the sector. An agent you retain would be different from aerospace. In the aerospace sector than in the agri-food sector, and we do keep a list. So contact us or contact the trade commissioner responsible for the sector that's of interest to you, and they will provide you with a list of potential agents.
Okay. Another question, which I think both of you can weigh in on, is how has corruption improved in Mexico since EDC started in this country? So 15 years, have we said. I think we've seen some significant headway, but Teri, you're there in market. You
Sure,
tell us.
I can comment. I know that a lot of the reform agenda is actually to address that. So they are putting certain measures in place, certain institutions are being created with the ultimate objective to eliminate corruption. So, you know, these are still, how would you say, we need to see it take effect, and also I'm aware as well that they have instituted like hotlines where companies can call and report some of these incidents. So they've taken a lot of measures, which is very positive, and they recognize really that this is an issue. So there's a lot of new tools that they're looking at implementing to minimize or reduce or eliminate it, really.
Okay. François?
Okay, very quickly. So corruption varies a lot from one level of the government to the next and from one region to the next. It tends to be more prevalent at the more local levels. Some states have done a really good job at dealing with corruption. And at the federal level, they've done a lot to deal with the issue. And we've seen you know, what they've done with round one bidding, for example. It's a very transparent process. They're taking a lot of precautions to make sure that there's no any you know, risk of being perceived as having a biased process. So they've done a lot to remove all the bias and make everything as transparent and accountable as possible. You know, you will have read about the Querétaro to Mexico high-speed train project that's now canceled for the second time for other reasons. Now it's because of budget cuts, but the first time it was canceled was because of allegations of bias in the bidding process and lack of transparency. So the president is very, very concerned that this is an issue that's on top of his mind, and he's taking steps to deal with the process, but it's a very difficult issue to deal with.
And you know, we've seen that at home as well. You know, in Quebec and in certain levels of municipal politics. So this, you know, is an issue.
Yes.
You know, but we are working very diligently both here in Canada and obviously other jurisdictions as well. And Mexico has made a lot of headway, I would say. That's
Correct,
fair
yeah.
to say. So our time is running short, so we have time for about one, maybe two more questions. So if you have an unanswered questions, and believe me, there's a lot of them here, just hold tight. We're going to let you know how to send in your question to get an answer. We do, as you have to register, we do know who you are, so we can get in touch with you and answer your question directly. So last two, just to move through here, a number of questions in terms of EDC's financing. One was we'd like to investigate how to get financing for our Latin America customers. Yes, obviously that is something clearly that we do, whether it's in Mexico or throughout LATAM. I think we have 5 regional offices
Yes.
throughout the Latin America broader. Question for you, Teri. We are a Canadian company with a Mexican branch. Can we get EDC insurance for our Mexican branch for receivables in Mexico?
So quick answer is yes, we can.
Okay, I thought so.
So we have relationships with some of the local insurance companies in Mexico that actually do that for us, sort of as honor fronting. So we definitely give us a call, and we'll be able to give you the names of the entities that we work with.
Okay. Last one, François. I'd like to run this one. Does the Mexican rule of law protect intellectual property rights of hardware and software? Have you come across this question before?
Not so much in Mexico. Based on what I hear from the companies that are here, it's not as much of an issue as China, where I was before. So, you know, whereas it comes up on a daily basis, that question in China, I haven't heard it really here. You know, we have some companies in the ICT sector here, well-known Canadian companies that have done business overseas, and I've never heard a complaint. But I'm not an expert on IP protection, and we can provide you with more information from our ICT officer if you contact us.
Okay. Anything to add, Teri?
I know.
Okay.
Nothing to add there.
Just one last little bit here. There is an upcoming automotive trade, either show or mission, coming up in Querétaro later this month. What is your view on this show? Is it worthwhile, and what are any tips on working that show?
So yes, it's absolutely worthwhile. In fact, it's a great opportunity to let you know that there's lots of shows where EDC partners together with the Trade Commissioner or other provincial partners to put a matchmaking program together. And when we say matchmaking, it's getting the Canadian companies to meet with some of our foreign buyer relationships there. And there is one for this automotive show. So please leave your contact details. We'll make sure we get our automotive expert to reach out to you and give you more information. So we will be having a program there, as well as some other events. We have the PDAC show, which is the largest mining show in Canada, beginning in March. We have an event, a program there as well. We have the GPS, the Global Petroleum Show in Calgary in June. We have a program, a matchmaking event there. So what we do is we invite all of our foreign relationships there, well, not all, but some of them, and we make sure that we engage and have the matchmaking again to make sure you meet the needs of the foreign buyer.
François, very quickly, will you be at the show, and can you offer any advice?
Okay, so we know that there's going to be 471 companies participating from all over the world to the show, including about 37 from Canada. And the embassy is participating, as are some of the provinces and EDC. So definitely it's of a lot of interest to us.
Okay. Thanks, François. So that is our time, and I have to say, just a tremendous amount of questions. We're going to do our very best to contact all of you and try to find some way to get you the information that you need. So thank you. If you have other questions, please call us at 1-800-229-0575. That should be coming up on your screen if it's not there already. I'd also like to remind you that you will be able to review today's presentation in its entirety on our website at edc.ca. And what we're going to do is send you an email with a link to this webinar as soon as it is available. All you'll have to do is click on it, it'll take you right, and you can watch it, rewind it, find the information that is relevant to you. Would also like a very special thank you to our speakers today. Teri, François, you were phenomenal. Such a wealth of information. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you, everybody.
And if you'd like to learn more about this in terms of Mexico or other markets, please visit our website at edc.ca. And also Trade Commissioner Service, look that up. Valuable. You have to go and check that out if you're a Canadian exporter. We also have a knowledge center where you'll find a lot of information about countries and resources. We're here to help you. It's our job. It's our job at TCS as well. So thank you very much for joining us today. Have a great day in trade.